From the moment we are born to the day we die, we are under a spell. We are controlled by the magicians who use marketing and propaganda to manipulate our every thought. From religious leaders to company executives, from politicians to secret military elites, everything we do, say, and even think is scrutinized. There have been many books and films that have attempted to reveal the stupidity of the so-called reality we have created. Often the metaphors are ignored or misunderstood. The truth is simple. Mankind has stepped out of a natural state of existence and walked blindfolded into a world of insanity. We are force-fed information, drugs, poisoned food, and told we should feel lucky. We are told that we live in a free world, while everything we do is controlled. For thousands of years the system has been built, slowly consuming our true nature. Many are happy in their state of delusion, but every now and then a rogue appears who recognizes the truth for what it really is. Do you wish to stay plugged into the system, or are you ready to set yourself free? Welcome to your world. Welcome to a false reality. There is an awakening to the self and to the wonder of the cosmos that has driven thinking men and women for generations. It is the same awakening that has been the cause of the effect of religion and belief. It is the same awakening that has then caused man to revolt against the same. It is the awakening that has been written, painted, sculptured, symbolized and placed into music for thousands of years. From mythology to etymology, this opening up of the mind to the potentials of the human spirit has been known about ever since man began to think. And yet, now in the 21st century, mankind has created more chains to bind himself than at any point in human history. From the very beginning, mankind has sought to free his mind from the constraints of a consciousness that seemed to bind him into a world divided. The animals around him followed natural cycles and marched thousands of miles in tune with the breath of the earth, the phases of the moon, and the warmth of the sun. Man pondered this remarkable phenomena because he was now aware of it, and this awareness gave him the need to explain it. Without explanation, everything seemed strange, and he therefore feared it. What man did not understand, he could not control, and lack of control and understanding meant simply one thing: chaos. The consciousness of the mind needed order to survive, and so he began to form structures within his thoughts for all things. He gave symbols and words to everything that previously didn't need them. The bird didn't care that it was a bird. The fish just were, and the lions were boss in their own domain. The mind of man came along and gave them all names and forced them and himself into ordered boxes. This simply led to constraint, and man had begun to form his own prison. He made names for leaders, gave them wonder and awe. He created gods and deities and worshipped them. He ordered his tribe and family structures, and at the end of all this he had developed dogma, doctrine, rules and regulations. Man had made a world of control, and he had no understanding of what he had done. Now, thousands and thousands of years later, our ordering of everything has created a chaotic mess, the direct opposite of what we had intended with our conscious mind. The animals, without self-awareness and higher consciousness, still have their natural and ordinary lives. They do not fear not having this or that, they just exist. They, like all things natural, find balance. We, with our millennia of striving to order our lives, have created chaos, and now billions of people are messed up and seeking reconnection to nature. The reason for the failure of our attempts is simple. We are out of step with nature. The route to our own true nature is to be found in the unconscious world of the mind, for in there our true self resides, hiding like a lost child. We are not aware of this because we are unconscious of it. It's that simple. Our conscious mind is almost an unnatural thing, in that it fights with nature because of fear. We all know that we are born and that we die. We know that we exist, and so we therefore have a personality. We are individual. This individual is precious to us because we believe it is us. The fear comes when we realise that this individual will one day die, and so it is not the fear of death itself, but the loss of the self. We have created wondrous imaginative answers to this problem. However, by explaining to our own minds that our body is not really us, and that it is simply a container carrying the self. When this container withers and rots, the true self or soul shall carry on after death and be transported to heaven, nirvana, or any other amazing realm perceived and fashioned by our ancestors. It is a triumph of consciousness, a prize of logical thought, that in the first place we became aware of our own frailties, and then discovered that it was all just a minor test on the road to St. Peter's pearly gates. Today, in the 21st century, as the old-fashioned concepts of religion are constantly bombarded by new, empowered free thinkers and science, we are finding new ways of explaining our lot. For the fear of the nihilistic mind is still one that strikes a discord, even in the mind of the most erudite brains. Anything from cloning and freezing our bodies to superior alien minds and quantum oneness are being trumpeted out for our choosing. From the physical to the metaphysical, like the shopping malls of downtown LA. We can choose an answer that suits our own personal life, peer group, and sense of right and wrong. The driving force, regardless of century, is still the same: fear. It seems that no matter how high we climb on the awareness ladder, the same driving force in the consciousness arises, and the same forces of nature surge beneath the surface in the unconscious realm. If the animals move and are driven by the forces of nature, something hidden within our unconscious world, then we are, as conscious and confused beings, at odds with this drive. It is a drive hidden in the dark world of the mind, the part we can no longer access with ease, and it is something that we seemingly cannot control. Because of our disjointed life with the unconscious world of nature, we fear it. Fear is now so complex that it is a paradox in our so-called ordered society. But we need to strip away all the myriad excuses we come up with to replace the word fear and realise that it all revolves around the loss of self. It is in fact the sickness at the heart of consciousness, and overcoming this one core principle will set you truly free on a road without delusions. The reason? Because we create delusions to escape it, and the marketing men of the world use every chance they can get to pull finely woven threads from our fears and form webs that trap us. If you overcome fear, then you will realise that your life has been spent in a web, created from your own emotions. All forms of fear are ugly and create ugly offspring. We see these as separate kinds of fear, but they are all from the same parent. This must not be confused with respect, which is the healthy version. I respect the roaring lion, and do not fear it. My respect, through understanding, means that I will not place myself in danger by stepping in front of a hungry lion. Fear, however, breeds and breeds. It spreads from you to your children. It evolves and transmutes. It creates prejudice and hatred. Fear is constantly used to manipulate our thoughts, our purchases, our votes, and our wallets. We need only watch the television commercials to see how fear is used to control our actions. But we only have ourselves to blame for handing over the control of our mind to this fear factor. We need to take back control. These are our thoughts and nobody else's. The only way to freedom is through personal integrity and honesty, not with anybody else, but with ourselves. If we are not truly honest with ourselves, then we are simply creating yet more illusions to overcome. If we know that we are deluding ourselves by going to church on Sunday or buying happiness during retail therapy, then we add guilt and confusion on top of fear. We all do this most of the time, and this is why life inside the mind has become so complicated, and why we have come so far away from nature. Half of the problem is the evolutionary childhood drive to learn. Misunderstanding this process, or not even realising it is there, has caused immense trouble. You see, as we grow, we have an inbuilt drive to learn, and this can cause a slight inferiority complex. For instance, we do not know as much as our parents, and so we feel inferior. This can stifle the self and cause us to take on personality as well as knowledge. As long as the knowledge is useful, valid and valuable, then it is fine. But if the knowledge is worthless, and even poisonous, then we are in effect poisoning our minds. Adding the personality of the parent or teacher or other influence is yet again distancing us from who we are and our connections to nature. This drive continues with us even past childhood, and is yet another evolutionary drive utilised by the marketing man. A simple example is to take a screen hero, let's say James Bond. We go to the cinema and watch this brave, handsome and intellectual man save the world. We admire these things, and so we try to emulate them, to take on a Bond persona. In the 1950s, many females did the same with Doris Day films. In fact, none of these characters were real. Doris Day was acting, and Bond is the creation of an alter ego by the writer Ian Fleming, who drank and smoked himself to death at an early age. The point is that we attempt to copy or mirror an ideal that is itself flawed because it was created by a human mind, and so we fall short, as we all must. This leads to yet further elements of inferiority and lack of self-worth. A great many neuroses and psychological problems are caused by the lack of understanding of this evolutionary drive, and the parents' inability to see this and teach or train accordingly. Never in the history of man has there been a perfect time, and so we need not seek out a sunken Atlantis. Never in the future of mankind will there be a perfect civilization, and so we better not sit and wait for Star Trek to fix things for us. No one religion is righteous. All fall short of the glory they call God. No state has created the ideal place to live. No family is flawless, no friend wholly committed. We are the best thing we have. We have to live with ourselves. Others can run away from us or lock us in a room. We will be in that room with ourself, and so that is where we must find the truth, and that is where we must discover balance and harmony. Listening to the world of man will simply confuse our minds yet further. Listening to nature, which has perfect balance, and indeed is powered by the force of balance, is the right place to go for help. We must return to the garden. This is an economic world. It is structured around money, and anything that gets in the way of the machine is more often than not moved or eradicated. There is no room for anything to oppose this. Each one of us is in the system, whether we like it or not. And we believe there is often precious little we can do about it. But how did all this begin? And who was the originator of the system? In the beginning, mankind was nomadic. For a period so long that it staggers the mind, we travelled along coastlines, around lakes, and traversed river systems. We simply could not travel across land, because most of it was covered in trees and vegetation. We did so purely to hunt and collect foodstuffs, and then return to our boats. This is the way and form mankind evolved his mind over vast periods of time. But how was man able to navigate over the sea? This is an open question and is subject to much debate. He certainly watched the stars, sun and moon. He placed markers along the way, but he also had an inbuilt homing mechanism, a sense of direction. Now mostly lost due to confusion of the modern society and modern mind. There are many scientific test results which confirm that man does have the ability, probably via his pineal organ, to judge direction intuitively. This ability is due to the electromagnetic energy of the Earth and the magnetic connection between it and the pineal organ within the brain, in exactly the same way that a bird uses magnetite within its pineal organ to pick up the electromagnetic resonance. In short, mankind had connection to the world around him, and this is just one way in which we were more in tune with our environment. But we were in tune in other ways too. We were in tune with our needs and nature's larder. We followed herds as they migrated. We knew which plants were safe to eat, and we only took what we needed because we simply could not carry an overabundance of produce. All the anthropological evidence reveals that mankind was more peaceful and even lived longer lives than his later descendants who would settle down. Eventually, it appears that populations grew and nomadic cultures began to partly settle down. These settlements were probably originally staging posts for extended stays during winter or other such times, and eventually the rot set in. Remaining in one location for extended periods brought with it all manner of problems. Firstly, it brought the need to cultivate the land and to store provisions, because the animal larder would carry on moving and natural vegetation would carry on and follow the seasons. Secondly, it brought disease because of human and animal waste and all kinds of other filth. And thirdly, it brought strife in ways that the nomadic smaller groups would not have foreseen. These settlements would be attracting more and more people into the one single location, forcing people together for longer and longer periods of time in cramped and rapidly unnatural environments. Mankind was growing apart from nature and had to learn a whole new set of skills, from building to being more socially oriented. Structures of wood and structures of society brought with them hierarchy and alpha dominance in a different way to the previous nomadic life. Groups were now bigger, and so conflicts between those who would be in dominance would have been more frequent. But it was too late. The old ways were rapidly being forgotten. It is amazing how quickly the skills of the past generation can disappear. For example, today there are people who do not even know how to cook because their lifestyle has simply never called for the skill. We are constantly battling the balance between the income stream and the spending stream, and we find very little room for such trivial matters as cooking, let alone time for our children. But cooking is only one of the many skills that we are losing due to mass production of ready-made meals and lifestyle habits. In England, and I am sure this is true of many nations, even schools had to be legislated to bring back real cooked food. Eventually though, our newfound settlements had to find ways to deal with their new social problems, and the mind of man has a unique tool for the purpose: imagination. Man developed from within his own imagination new social structures of tribal leadership, and those who had maintained or learned new skills important for the group would become dominant. These were not always the strongest and best fighters or hunters, but more often than not, those who knew how to heal and gel the community. We call these people medicine men, shaman, and latterly, priests. As the Old Testament so eruditely informs us, it was the priesthood who would guide the people and even crown kings. The royal family of England is still to this day crowned by the Church as a direct result of this same ancient power structure, uniting religion and state. With this new advent of power came many new ways of manipulating the growing masses who were herded into the new imaginative religious structures and given rules in the form of dogma, doctrine and tradition. Now power was from the gods, and nobody could argue with such imagined power. The knowledge of navigation, of the stars, of the seasons, and of course, of the reality of the mind of man became powerful tools in the armoury of the Church. To know the seasons enabled the priest to appear magical and in touch with God. To know how to read the stars for navigation enabled the tribe to trade and invade. To know the mind of man allowed the priesthood to manipulate and control. All of this was truly a powerful knowledge. This knowledge was passed down within the brotherhoods in symbolism, latterly in texts, and certainly in traditions. With a new set of eyes, we can now ourselves find the keys to unlock these historical conundrums. We have to understand our ancestors were able to do this, and we have to start by realizing that they were humans just like us. They had fears, hopes, and struggled to survive and to comprehend their very place in the universe. In the depth of understanding, our ancestors discovered that they needed to find a way of passing on the knowledge they had uncovered, and they formed tales. Our historical friends were not simple folk, as we are led to believe. They had the same brain size as ourselves, and in fact in many ways they were better attuned to the things we now divisively call nature. You see, in our modern materialistic state, we forgot that we are human beings that have come from and live in the natural universe. we forgot because we create things from within our own imaginations and surround ourselves with them, and hence we today find ourselves in an imaginary world of things. But all was not well in mankind's early settled Edens, and differences of opinions would often arise between settled groups or tribes, and not least of these differences was jealousy. This distinctly negative element of the human mind would involve jealousy over land, produce, mates, and of course the still relevant modern problem of jealousy over holy sites. However, trade also played a big part in the greater mix, and so tribes grew steadily more and more wealthy in terms of possessions, as each area had its own special supply of salt, gold, animals, plants, and even access routes to the more distant lands. This was the birth of our modern system many thousands of years ago, built upon an unnatural desire to remain in one location, and it also built upon the natural desire to be the best, one of the strongest evolutionary drives. Trading went on like this for millennia, with the priesthood often controlling the process and growing in power themselves as their own communities prospered. They would take a percentage of the produce and offer it to the gods in order to maintain the weather and good fortune of the tribe. The greatest of gods, the sun, would be worshipped and aided in its journey to reappear the following day. It was the giver of life and the destroyer. It mirrored the duality in the mind of man himself, and so we were formed in his likeness. We were solar beings, formed and given life by the power of the golden orb, and nothing became more important than ensuring its daily and yearly cycles. The priests of this great power were the alpha males, the medicine men or shaman of earlier times. It was they who gave authority to the kings, who himself must be the son of the sun on earth. He was the marketing tool of the priesthood, and history is awash with the violent downfalls of the solar king when he stepped out of line and upset the priesthood. Markets emerged near or even in temples, and bustled with people and produce of the wider world. Social commerce also emerged, as priesthoods shared or traded knowledge with other cultures, and soon belief systems across vast continents had little to set them apart. Much of this knowledge or tradition was very important and of value to the community, and involved knowledge of astrology and astronomy to enable them to predict the seasons and for navigation. As the power base of trade grew, so the ability to navigate became extremely important, and as the majority of the population had forgotten how to do this, it emerged as a special knowledge guarded closely by the elite. Control of the trading markets, both of the land upon which it was carried out and the navigation required to operate it, grew so powerful over time that the priesthood would do almost anything to maintain control. This is why much religious literature is awash with rules and regulations for trade and commerce. The system of trading eventually needed organising differently because of the lies. It all began because of deceit, and it remains pretty much the same today. At the market, a thing called a promise emerged, whereby a man trading a goat for a pig would promise to bring his goat the following day, only to fail in his promise. The priesthood, or leader who controlled the process, realised that some new system was needed to come into play, and so created money, from the word moner, meaning to warn. This new money was very cleverly based upon the gods themselves, adding incredible weight and fear to the promise. Gold was manifestly the solar divinity, the sun, and silver was the lunar deity, a mirror of the sun. Handing over a symbolic representation of the gods was a powerful promise, and the gods would know if you reneged on your promise. The church itself backed the promise, and so became the bank. Power was well and truly in the hands of the few, and the rest of us simply had no choice but to conform. This situation is almost unchanged, and today many banks are still at least partly owned by the church. Our lives are still, and more so than ever, run by money, and we have no choice but to live in the world of commerce. Every day we hand over our images of the solar deities, which are no longer even real gold, but instead are promises of gold. There are more promises of gold in the world than there is gold, and so the system, created because of lies and deceit, is itself a total lie. But it is the system we live in, and individually we must make our own decisions on how to do so. But there is more deception than we know, and it is to these deceptions we must now turn. From the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep, we are subjects of a massive machine. We are plugged in like a light that is only alive and lit by the machine, and because of this, we no longer know how to shine for ourselves. But many do not realise that the machine in fact feeds from us, using our energy to capture and grow the machine that in turn captures more and more people hourly. We are all, in one way or another, slaves to the machine. Every single one of us must sell something to get money. Whether we sell our skills, services, products, or even our very soul, we all must constantly sell to earn. And because everybody is selling to everybody else, we also buy and buy. In our overpopulated world, full of people who no longer know the skills of basic survival, we must buy the basic products such as food and even water. But man has used his unique imagination to make better and more imaginative food and water, or so we believe. In fact, we dress up the ordinary and use our own inbuilt psychology to convince others that this added value is worth the extra money. We place a clever label on a bottle of water, add mystique, and then charge a ridiculous amount of money for what is basically a free product of the earth that we can no longer have access to as individuals because of the society we have created. We do the same for all manner of goods. In addition to this, we also create products or services that we do not need, and again add value or perception that we want to buy into. In order to understand how we are led down this path, we must see into the mind of the marketing man. Many marketing men will tell you that they need to understand the product or service in depth. This is true only in the sense that the marketing man needs to know to whom the product has to be sold. He defines the primary market sector and then secondary sectors, and very often will have multiple level campaigns. Let's take an example. Let's assume we need to sell a product to children. There are a great many ways to the market, but our purpose here is to see how, as human beings, are manipulated into action, or sometimes inaction. To sell to children, sometimes we may need to go through the desires and perceptions of the parents. However, let's assume we are targeting the children themselves. Firstly, we have to assume a product, and for this simple illustration, let's assume a new candy bar. In the first place, we have to make sure the packaging is right. Our inner desire to eat candy is in fact perfectly natural and is based upon the need for fruit, which of course feeds the body's needs for vitamins and glucose. Unfortunately, the candy bar overfeeds us sugar and not glucose or vitamins, and so defeats the object, and in fact simply leaves us craving more, because the body, firstly, is not getting what it needs, and secondly, there are often chemicals within the bar that are short and long-term addictive. So with this knowledge of the marketing man simply dresses the candy bar up to look like fruit, or whatever natural product or part of our diet it is replacing. In addition to this, there is the hormone process, which must be taken into account. The different ages of man produce different levels of hormones. When we are younger, our natural drives and desires are stronger and more acute. This means that when we are younger, we are more primary, and so primary colours, shapes and sounds and smells are used. This is of course a generalisation, not every individual is the same. And this is indicative of how we are all placed into boxes throughout our lives, creating more unnatural states of existence and distancing us further from our own intuition. The marketing man's statistical data does in fact reveal that these uses of primary devices on children and young adults consistently delivers good results. The reverse of this is often true of the elderly generations, who prefer more pastel colours and softer shapes and sounds. We can see then in this simple demonstration how we can again fall into the trap of lies and deceit by our own hormones, desires and drives, and the manipulation of the machine. This manipulation has been in existence for thousands of years, and mankind, from the priesthood to the state, has learned how to use this to control us. The common folk of Europe, who were kept humble and illiterate for generations, were fed mass propaganda in stained glass windows and with the pageantry of state occasions. All of this and more fed the story of the chosen elite, to the masses, and the masses absolve themselves of responsibility by following. The next element our marketing man must include is a thing known as a branding device. This is not necessarily a corporate identity, as corporations have many products and each one must have its own branding identity. If we take our fictional candy bar, it may very well carry the corporate logo, which is a symbol of the corporation. This can add value to the product if the corporation has a strong identity, and can pull upon the emotions of the individual purchasing the product with the tribal sense of loyalty, brand or corporate loyalty. This is the exact same as the loyalty to the church or state, and again absolves the individual of responsibility for what he is eating or indeed feeding his children. This absolution is false, as we all hold responsibility for our own actions. Just because a corporation is big and has been around for a long time does not mean that it is perfect. Far from it. The corporation is still run by humans out for greed and growth. We tend to forget that several big brand companies in fact started by selling us drugs or making weapons. The emotions and ties of the corporation must firstly therefore be ones of trust in the corporation and its products. Any corporation that loses this trust factor is on a slippery slope and will have to go through a period of self-recreation in the marketplace to re-establish itself or even rebrand itself. One thing corporations, states and religions fear the most is the powerful word of mouth, which spreads bad news on the devil's radio of gossip like wildfire. This is the power of the individual against the control of the few, and is one reason that corporations attempt to appear under a disguise and therefore independent on the internet. Once we have a strong corporate identity, we must then brand the candy bar dependent upon the selected marketplace. Some candy bars are in fact retro branded to attract both children and a sense of history and tradition embedded in the older generations, allowing the person to recapture their youth, a time always emotionally tied and often imaginary. The branding of a product will go through a series of market tests with a specially selected group and the results collated. This may happen several times, but in each case the marketing man will be looking for emotional results. This all pulls upon our deepest desires, and nothing is stronger than utilisation of emotions. Religion, politics and corporate greed has used emotional response for an awful long time. In the end, marketing is about the psychology of man, and whoever best understands the mind of man will succeed in the financial stakes. Once a product has been branded and packaged according to all these criteria and more, the next step in the game is to convince the general public and the specific market sector to purchase the product, and in order to do this we have to develop a very simple structure that utilises our own psychology. The simple four main principles of this are known as AIDA: attention, interest, desire and action. Begin by getting the person's attention. Keep the attention by building interest and desire, and then commit them to some form of action. Create a dream and then sell it, and nobody realises that they are in fact buying into exactly that, a dream from within the mind of another. It is not reality, if indeed we can decide on what reality truly is anymore. It is not needed. It is just desired because of our bastardised social norm and position. We pay more for water in a fancy bottle than the worth of the bottle and the water, all because it may have a French and classy sounding name. This water is shipped thousands of miles to get to your door, when all along there is water almost everywhere on this planet. We pay a fortune for a ready-prepared plastic bag full of salad that meets our modern lifestyle, whilst all along we fill our gardens with plastic lights, barbecues and pretty flowers. In parallel with this, people starve in the third world. What is reality? Ask a starving child and see if it is the same as your own perception, if you truly need a personal benchmark. Our reality is not true reality. It is not reality, and it is not needed. It is all self-perpetuating a massive lie, and we all in our daily lives help to continue the cycle. We all make dreams and sell them to others, and we then end up believing them ourselves, and before anybody realises it, we are all living in a dream world that simply does not exist. Now we have seen how our very nature dreams and desires trap us, and are used against us, for and by us. Nobody can now claim to be free of all this, nor innocent of its abuse. But today there is yet another level of control upon us, and one in which we as human beings are rapidly becoming lost. It is a world of dreams in such an incredibly profound and stark fashion that we ought to be amazed that we have fallen into its gaping mouth. As the battle to beat everybody else has ensued, it has brought all manner of imaginative inventions. These are forms, manifested from within the mind of man, and here is an issue because one thing is sure: the mind of man is divided and at odds with not just itself but everybody else, and now nature too. We all constantly fight intense battles inside our mind. We argue with ourselves as if we were two or more of us in there. We argue on an hourly and daily basis, trying to reason through mundane issues. The technologies of today are in fact taking us further and further away from reality, and more into a dream state than ever before. Billions of children around the world are being fed unrealities by computer games. They live out their precious lives in a world that is not real, whilst mum and dad spend their every waking moment battling and selling to pay for the products of the delusional world. The child is only being prepared for one thing: a life of exactly the same as his parents, a treadmill of buy and sell and lack of self-knowledge. Instead of learning the simple basic skills of life and love, children today are taught how to manipulate the illusionary world of computer screens, moving imaginary characters around and killing and maiming the enemy, which is normally some politically propagandized and illusionary evil role model. Most people do not realize the incredible amounts of money made from the multi-billion-dollar worlds of illusion, but they also don't realize the propaganda content is immense. In fact, there are many war games strategically funded by governments and other agenda-driven authorities and organizations that are specifically written to suck in the minds of the youth into particular ways of thinking. This creates masses of later controllable young adults for the financial war machine, and good voters who are now loyal to the cause. We are all pawns in a game that has gone out of control, because it is a life spent in an illusionary world with nobody specifically controlling it anymore. We all make assumptions about our leaders, peers, corporations, states and religion, and yet, all along, they are making assumptions about us. Nobody is in control anymore. It is simply all the world of the dream state, created over time by one thing and another, without a goal or a purpose, other than bastardized functions of the evolutionary mind. Now we have a world of technology that is overtaking us, and we have to somehow try to keep our heads wrapped around the lightning speed with which it moves. There are even extensions to the computer game dream world, as with mobile phones we can in fact take this world of illusion with us anywhere we go. There is no escaping this phenomena, because the human tribal instinct to be as good or better than everybody else and to be accepted in our society forces us to participate. The system is now beyond human nature. We have created a monster, a Frankenstein, and we have lost ourselves. The lesson to learn is that just like the Frankenstein monster, it is a mirror of ourselves, and it is destroying the very essence of what we are. All of this is why even now in the 21st century we remain stupid humans who constantly battle with each other, because we are forcing ourselves away further and further from the truth of what we really are. We have created a world of imagination in which we can live out a dream life, and to pay for it we live in hell. Because we live in a world of technology that dehumanizes us, and we eat addictive food because of the inhuman state and speed of our existence, we end up with a confused mind. Our children are like sponges, and so we have to question what we are teaching them. Today, children are being fed drugs by those doctors we are taught to trust, because it speeds up the process of supposed mental correction and enables the drug companies to maximise profits and health officials to get more cattle through the surgery. Speed, profit and dehumanising are the keys to the system we have created. Parents no longer have the skills or time to bring up their own children because of workload, and so they pay others to do it for them. They buy their children's love with computers and mobile phones, and feed the growing child's sense of disassociation from their parents, society, and their own humanity. The parents end up in a cycle of debt they cannot escape, and in fact constantly refeed the system of madness. The children have no idea what is happening to them, and become depressed, hypersensitive and undisciplined. The answer is, as ever, drugs. We pile all manner of chemicals into our children, starting with the fast food and ending in the pharmaceutical giant's drugs. What are we creating for the future of the world? We destroy the environment, and now we even destroy the minds of our children. The whole process is madness, and simply feeds the profit of corporations who cause the problem and then sell us the cure. No matter what influences have preyed upon us, and no matter how much we have wished to hand over the responsibility for our actions and thoughts, we are an equal part of the universe to everybody else, and we share in our responsibility of it. No matter how much we believe in this God or that, no matter which political form we adhere to, and no matter what experience we believe has formed our own personal belief systems, we are in fact the root of it all, an individual life form driven by the force and power of nature, from which we came and to which we shall go. We, as individuals, have the ability and right to make our own decisions. The question is, as ever, do we have the willpower?